In the last video, we learned about winds and how winds are created. And the winds are created by the uneven heating of the earth by the sun, which creates convection currents in the atmosphere, which creates the winds that we feel. And those winds actually create currents in the ocean. They create these things called surface currents. So they're called surface currents because they're currents that just occur on the surface of the water. And these currents are driven mainly by the trade winds. So the trade winds are the winds that are the main winds that are around the equator, and they're the most constant winds on Earth. So as the wind starts to blow, it actually pushes on the surface of the water, and it gets the water moving. And as the water moves, that current gets deflected by the Coriolis effect. And the Coriolis effect takes that movement of the water and it actually bends the movement of the water. So it'll move to the left in the southern hemisphere and the right in the northern hemisphere because of the spinning of the Earth. And as those currents get started and they start to move, they form these big whole ocean currents called gyres. Okay? And a gyre is just simply a water flow in a circular pattern around the edge of an ocean basin. So here's like what I'm talking about. So these green arrows represent the direction of the wind. So the wind is blowing and it's pushing on the surface of the water and it's moving that water. And as that water moves, it is going to be bent by the Coriolis effect. So let's do that in red. So as it moves, it's going to be bent by the Coriolis effect. Okay, and the water is going to keep moving, keep getting pushed, okay, and it's going to get bent and it runs into a continent. In the North Pacific gyre, that continent is Asia. It's a rather large one. And so it moves towards the poles, okay, and the water keeps moving, and eventually water gets pulled down from along the coast of California and Mexico to come back to the equator because as the water moves from here, it has to have water come from somewhere in order to fill in that gap, and some of that water gets pulled down from along the coast of North America to fill in that gap. And so what we eventually end up getting is these big whole ocean currents that go from all around the edges of the ocean basin called a gyre. Okay? It's called a gyre. And so there's 5 gyres, which you can see in this picture, okay, on Earth. And then here's just another picture to help you see it. So this is in the Atlantic. So these big gyres get formed, and in those gyres, we actually name and classify the currents. We break that gyre into 4 separate currents. And the western boundary current is the current that is the fastest and the deepest. It is also the current that is carrying warm water towards the poles. So when you look at this picture right here, okay, this is going to be the western boundary current right here. Okay, so it's going to be moving the fastest because it's going to be coming away from the wind, which got it started and moving in the first place. And it's also going to be the deepest current because, again, it's just coming away from the energy of the wind. And it's going to be carrying warm water from the equator here, down here at the equator, towards the poles, up towards the North Pole and the North and the South Pole and the South. The eastern boundary current is going to be bringing cold water from the poles down towards the equator. So it's going to pull water down. And then the transverse currents are the currents that connect the two. So in here, and green is your western boundary current, and blue would be your eastern boundary current, and then the black would be the transverse currents that connect the two. Right? So we actually classify those currents based on their position. These currents actually have a huge biological impact. The water that is moving away from the equator has very little nutrients in it. And as it moves away from the equator, those nutrients the lack of nutrients in that water are going to affect the type of ecosystems that you can find. So you have coral reefs, which like to be in areas that do not have a lot of nutrients in them. They like those types of that type of water. And so you actually find on Earth a lot of your coral reefs are located on western boundary currents. So if we look at our North Pacific gyre, some of the major coral reefs that are found on Earth are over here in Indonesia, okay, which is this western boundary current, on the western boundary current of the North Pacific Gyre. Also in the South Pacific Gyre, if you look there, okay, so it's bringing warm water down. The Great Barrier Reef of Australia is located right here. So you get barrier reefs and all sorts of reefs that are formed in the western boundary currents. And then you also get eastern boundary currents that will affect things. Those eastern boundary currents are the currents that are coming down from the poles. They're going to be very rich in nutrients, and they're going to be very productive. So if you look at this picture again, if you look at the eastern boundary current here, okay, it's going to be pulling cold, nutrient-rich water down from the poles. Kelp forests like those kinds of conditions, and so you actually find lots of beautiful kelp forests off the coast of California and the northern US, and then you also would find kelp forests over here. So it's those gyres actually greatly affect where on Earth you can find different kinds of ecosystems.